How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. And Dillard. Most of us have some idea of how we want our day, our week, or the month to go. You know what needs your attention. You know what you've been putting off, what needs to get done, and probably a few things you keep telling yourself you're going to make time for. But then, somebody needs something. Something takes longer than you expected. Or your plans just simply get moved. And before you know it, you're wondering where all your time went. But that's life. You can't control every interruption, predict every problem, or build a schedule so perfect that nothing can knock it off track. However, there's a difference between adjusting a plan because life happens and never having much of a plan to begin with. Because when you don't decide where your time and attention are supposed to go, something else will decide for you. And the dangerous part is that you could be busy the entire time, but did you actually move forward on the things you said mattered? There's a point where I don't have time stops being an explanation. And then the question changes from whether you decided what you were going to do or whether you handed over that decision to other people or other things. Because there's a difference between intending to do something and actually deciding that you're going to do it. Additionally, when they're intentions, they don't require much from you. We can genuinely want an outcome, believe that it's important, and still fail to take the necessary actions to make it happen. That's where deciding gets different. A decision starts removing ambiguity. It takes something from, I need to get to that, and gives it a place in your life. Maybe it's simply deciding that before you give your attention to something less important, something more important gets handled first. But that also doesn't mean you have to map every hour of every day. Granted, we all have jobs. We have families, responsibilities. Our schedules change, and things that we simply can't predict. But unpredictability doesn't eliminate your need to make decisions beforehand. You can still begin a day, a week, or the month knowing what's important, knowing what needs to move forward, and knowing there are things you refuse to keep pushing into the next one. However, making a decision doesn't guarantee you'll succeed, because life still gets a vote on the interference. But when something actually matters to you, at some point, it has to graduate from something you hope happens to something you've decided deserves your time. And once you make that decision, something else becomes a lot easier to recognize. Your priorities aren't really measured by what you say is important. They're measured by what consistently gets your time, attention, and energy, which is a harder measurement because it doesn't care much about what you meant to do. You can say you want to grow professionally, that you want to build something, learn something, change something about your life. But eventually, there has to be some evidence of it. So sometimes one part of your life has to temporarily take a back seat because something more important needs to move to the front. Problem is when temporarily becomes the permanent explanation. And that's where things can get uncomfortable. Your calendar doesn't know the story you tell yourself. It doesn't know how busy you've been or how badly you wanted to make something happen. It just shows you where the time went. And you only have so much time, so much attention, and so much energy to distribute. Then, if something keeps getting none of them, the question becomes pretty simple. Is it really a priority? Or is it just something you keep saying is important because admitting otherwise would force a different conversation? And that different conversation becomes a lot harder to avoid when you have something to measure yourself against. you can compare what you plan to do with what actually happened. And research on goal progress has found that monitoring what you're doing improves the likelihood of what you planned actually coming to fruition. Then that effect becomes even stronger when progress is physically recorded. There's something different about being able to see the evidence instead of relying on your impression or how you feel that things are going. Because we're all pretty good at giving ourselves credit for effort. Whereas when you know and decide what needed to move forward, now you're forced to face it. What happened to those things? Maybe they all got done. Maybe one did. Or maybe none of them did. And the point isn't to beat yourself up over the results. The point is that you've created enough clarity to now measure it. When you say, this is what I said mattered, and now that time has passed, what did my actions prove mattered? But none of this works if you assume you have complete control over what happens next, because you don't. And sometimes the right decision is to throw out the plan, because in some situations, sticking to the original plan just because you made it is the least responsible choice. But we also have the tendency to underestimate how long things will take. We often imagine a perfect version of the future where everything goes according to schedule. Then reality shows up with all the obstacles we somehow forgot to account for. So then if you planned 10 things, but realistically had room for 6, missing 4 doesn't mean you lack discipline. It might just mean your planning wasn't very good. And accountability isn't about automatically blaming yourself when something doesn't go according to plan. Whereas it's the willingness to acknowledge and take ownership of why it didn't. Being honest about, did the circumstances genuinely change? Did you underestimate what something required? Did another responsibility legitimately become more important? Or did you just feel like not doing what you planned to do when that moment arrived? Which is why flexibility can't become another convenient word for abandoning commitments whenever they're uncomfortable. Because there's a difference between adjusting to reality and repeatedly negotiating against yourself. Plans should move when they need to move. But when they do, you should know why. Yet the goal isn't to control that period of time. The goal is to stop allowing yourself to start it without a commitment, and then treating everything that happens after as if you had no choice in the matter. However, knowing the why is where this becomes a much more personal conversation. Because at some point, the day, the week, or the month all end. And whatever you planned at the start now crosses paths with what you actually accomplished. You now have the results. But this is also where you have to be careful because rationalization usually doesn't sound ridiculous. It sounds reasonable. You were tired. Things got busy. Something came up. Or you'll have more time tomorrow, next week, or next month. But sometimes rationalization is simply an excuse. You had an opportunity and didn't take it. You chose something easier. You let yourself get distracted. You kept saying yes to things that weren't important, and then claimed there wasn't enough time for something that was. That's what makes this kind of accountability different. You can explain it away and move into the next phase without anyone questioning you, except you know. Then, if that same commitment continues to not be achieved, it becomes, why do you keep allowing it to happen? And that answer might expose a standard that you've lowered, a priority you don't actually believe in, or something difficult you've been avoiding. But regardless of the reason, there's always another day coming, another week, another first of the month, another point where you can tell yourself, this time, it's going to be different. And maybe it will be. The date on the calendar can give you a place to start. but it can't make a decision for you. At some point, you have to decide what deserves something from you before everything else starts asking for it. And not every day is going to be productive. There will be times when simply handling what showed up was the accomplishment. That's real life. But there will also be times when you know that that wasn't the reason. You knew what mattered. You knew what you wanted to get done. You had opportunities to do it. Yet you kept making choices to move further away from what you say you want. And tomorrow, next week, or next month, you'll get another stretch of time that you can fill with intentions. You can hope it all goes well, and you can wait and see what happens. Or you can decide what's going to matter. And then, when that time passes, you won't have to wonder what happened to it. You'll be able to see what you did with it. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep showing up.